there are kids here. I apologize, my sincerest apologies. I didn't realize there were young children here, and I hope I haven't scarred you for life. And forget everything you just saw.
Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 373. Talking about some more death metal this time. Talking about Imprecation, which is actually an archaic word for a curse, not someone saying the word implication in a cheesy, fake Chinese takey-outy accent. They're also a widely revered, at least by the right group of people, old school death metal act from Texas.
You have again sullied the fair name of the great sovereign state of Texas.
I know what you're thinking.
There's a whole lot of old school death metal bands that all got the monochromatic goat artwork, usually done by Chris Moyen or Mark Riddick, or maybe even Antichrist Kramer. What the heck makes Imprecation so gosh darn special?
You might ask.
Well, regarding that first point, if I thought the same way you do, I would never have given my personal favorite Crucifier album, Thy Sulphur Thrown on High, with its deliciously yellow monochromatic goat cover, a chance. And then I would have had to go through life without knowing that this riff existed. Which, as I'm sure we can all agree, would be a great tragedy. But as far as the monochromatic goat, Antichrist Kramer, Mark Riddick, Chris Moyen aesthetic goes, yeah, it's overused. There's a lot of fairly lame bands that tap into that sort of thing. But the aesthetic itself is pretty fucking sick. And there are bands out there that do justice to that aesthetic, for which no other aesthetic would really work. Imprecation is one of those bands. And this becomes immediately apparent upon hearing the first Imprecation song that I ever heard, The Awakening of Majestic Darkness off of 1993's Sigil of Baphomet 7-inch, featuring perhaps the darkest guitar sound I've ever heard in a death metal band.
Darknesses!
Like, if that guitar tone didn't hook you, I don't know what will, but I got a whole episode to attempt to convince you about these guys. So let's give it a shot. First of all, this is one of those death metal bands that's almost a black metal band in how their music hits you. Not that it's black and death metal or some nerdy genre term, but the impact of the music itself hits almost more like a black metal band than a death metal one. In fact, if someone were to say that Imprecation is one of the greatest US black metal acts of all time, I honestly wouldn't bat an eye. I feel the same way about early Vital Remains. But it's not just all slow, quasi-black metal shit. There's a decent amount of grind going on, too. And a lot of it has to do with Ruben Elizondo's drumming. He's one of the greatest unsung drummers within the death metal underground. Capable of cranking out the blast beats, but also knowing when to back off and let the really slow parts kind of eke their way into your soul. Like that breakdown right there. Or here, where we're bringing in, again, some kind of black metal sounding, specifically Hellenic black metal sounding keyboard work. Pretty sure I heard this same synth patch in early Rotting Christ. Then this drum part right here. It's kind of like mid-paced, double bass thing underneath ambient snare hits. Vintage Ruben Elizondo, the backbone of their sound. Then watch this part. Imprecation always really good at writing ends to their songs, like this chug riff right here. One of the best death metal bands at ending a song alongside stuff like Dismember, if you remember that whole part at the end of their very first album, and you can appreciate that sort of thing, you're gonna love how Imprecation structures their songs. This is a band that does that thing I love where they earn their long song lengths. There's not a lot of mindless repetition, but there's not a lot of nonsensical riff salad stuff going on either. Instead, all the songs are like a miniature horror story with a very clear narrative and starting and ending points. Peaks and valleys, rising and falling actions, all that good stuff your English teacher told you about. You see, Imprecation indulge in what I like to call the third strain of evil in American death metal. Because if you want to be evil and you're making American-style death metal, you could go the Floridian route, like Monstrosity. Where you just batter the listener senseless for your technical skill, just overwhelming them with malevolence in these dissonant riffs.
Well, that's not very nice.
Of course not! I'm
fucking evil! Alternatively, you could go for the Atlantic Northeast route, which many times is just as technical as the Floridian stuff. But there the malevolence comes from the contrast between the hyper-technical riffs and the super primitive, hardcore influence breakdown parts. The juxtaposition of that peculiar form of savagery against the hyper-technical death metal background is what generates the evil.
It is evil. It is so evil.
The third strain of evil generation within American death metal is a little bit harder to describe. It doesn't necessarily rely on technicality or contrast with breakdowns. Instead, the music itself just kind of pulls you into this dark abyss. Good example would be a band like Morpheus Descends. Yeah, I know I use that clip a lot, but it's one of my favorite death metal riffs of all time. Plus, it's interesting how that particular riff, very similar to your standard sort of Suffocation breakdown riff. But its usage within the music is entirely different on a structural level. Suffocation will put breakdowns like that as sort of a punctuation, an exclamation point at the end of a flurry of technical riffs. Type 2 evil death metal. Morpheus Descends, when they play that kind of riff, it sort of oozes out from under all the other riffs. It doesn't necessarily happen at the normal sort of breakdown inflection point for a song. Type 3 death metal. Another really good example would be a band like Incantation when they do stuff like this. And indeed, a lot of people label Imprecation as being one of many Incantation clones, which isn't really correct at all. If you read about where their influences were coming from and where they started out as a band, Imprecation, they respect Incantation, but they're not really that influenced by them. It was more a case of convergent evolution. Imprecation's roots go way deeper than just Incantation. They go back to the 80s with a band called Dark Reign that had Phil Westmoreland from Imprecation on guitars and the great Ruben Elizondo from Imprecation on drums. Absolutely an undersung demo level classic. I might actually like this a little bit better than Necrovore.
Take care, Arbiter. What you say is heresy.
And honestly, I'm slightly miffed that I never saw anybody talk about these guys until I started doing research for the Imprecation episode. Because Dark Reign 100% deserves your attention, particularly their third demo from 1990, Immolated Slaves, which is a nearly flawless example of chaotic 80s death metal. And there's one point on this demo in particular that features perhaps the most intense drumming I've ever heard from an 80s death metal band. And it's coming up right around now. Like, are you hearing these paradiddles, these drum rolls, whatever the fuck these are called? Absolutely nuts.
Still going, this asshole.
And then it crashes into this blast beat. Sounds like something Mike Smith might have done in Suffocation years later. Super ahead of its time in terms of brutality, technical complexity, just percussive force within a death metal band. I don't know why this isn't as well known as something like Human Waste or Divus de Mortus. It's a damn shame that the 3 Dark Reign demos aren't as easily available nowadays. In fact, I still can't even find the first one. But I got this one with the best drumming ever. Watch this. And the way he just ties it to what the guitars are doing, sort of like the guitars are the canvas and the drums are just paint splashes and some kind of gory Jackson Pollock work. Check out this fucking tom part right here. Apparently, whilst they're not talked about that often today, back in the 80s and early 90s in Houston, these guys were like the brutal, savage death metal band. And so it makes sense that when another band grew out of them, that's going to draw some heads. So around 1991, Dark Reign had sort of drifted apart. A few of the guys went on to start up a new project called Undertaker that I can't find anything from. Then there was this other guy named Dave Herrera, a guitarist and vocalist. He actually happened to find Phil Westmoreland on the side of the row when Phil's car had broken down. He gave the dude a ride. They both recognized each other from the Dark Reign thing and just from seeing each other around at a lot of death metal parties in the area. Probably a decent amount of hell yeah, brother type shit going on. Found out that Phil and Ruben were starting up a new band and they were looking for a guitarist. Dave Herrera tries out as a guitarist and they don't really like his guitar playing style, but they liked his vocals a whole lot. So they grab a couple other guys, Mark Beecher and Victor Fernandez, and they start up Imprecation, who put out their first demo in 1992, and you can see how the sound has evolved from the very chaotic sort of thing that Dark Reign was doing towards the sound that Imprecation is known and loved for nowadays. It's still quite fast and chaotic at times, as you would expect. I mean, watch this fucking grind section right here. So it's got plenty of Dark Reign in its DNA, but then parts like this come in that are more uniquely Imprecation sounding, these atmospheric churning kind of riffs. Parts like this are definitely a standout on this demo. They're all linked together by faster, more blasting 80s death metal style parts, but then they'll have these sinister melodies creep up on you during the slower sections. Still unequivocally death metal sounding, but it's got that kind of almost black metal atmosphere going on. And even the fast blasting parts have just as much in common with war metal as they do with fast death metal and grindcore, at least to my ears. Then this part right here, this is fucking sick. It's a variation on that evil sounding melodic part from earlier, now given more of a death metal chug. These guys chug just as much as Suffocation, but they do it in a very different way. Like this doomy bit right here, this is uniquely Imprecation sounding. In fact, perhaps if more of these caverncore bands had listened to more Imprecation, that little 2010 subgenre would have lasted longer. Because nobody else does this style of riffing quite as well as Imprecation does. Then you're back into the fast, grindy, almost somewhat Immolation-y sounding, atmospheric, satanic grindcore stuff. Ceremony of the Nine Angles was an amazing demo, but I think Imprecation really turned into a classic band on that 7-inch I started the show out with. Sigil of Baphomet. We already heard The Awakening of Majestic Darkness, but there's another song on there, possibly the greatest song title of all time, Vomit Floods of Christian Remains. For this 1992 release, Phil got a new co-guitarist, that being Wes Weaver, who had previously been running a radio show that all the guys were listening to, and the evil dial got turned up to its maximum level on this release. For starters, this is when they started going really intense with the keyboard accents, like in this opening section right here with, again, the darkest guitar tone of all time, slowly oozing its way out of the speakers into your virgin ear holes. This release represents absolute aesthetic mastery in terms of creating dark death metal. Even during the fast sections like this one, it's a lot less grindcore and more just dark and atmospheric. And as you're hearing right now, of course, the drums are amazing. Ruben's an incredibly underrated drummer. And then bits like this right here where they're going back to that initial sort of dark melody that opened the song up in a new variant form. This honestly sounds more like black metal than death metal to me. But then the drums jump in to chop up that whole melodic section, and it goes back to being pure death metal. To quote an interview with David Herrera, he feels that true black metal is focused on atmosphere and infernal aesthetics, like a funeral shroud draped around your being, candles being lit, and pure Satan worship. True death metal is about embracing the soil, the musk of things decayed, the creak of a coffin lid, the chop of an axe, bringing all that to you via an unforgiving and pummeling assault on the senses. When you hear that man's definitions of black metal and death metal, it makes Imprecation's approach make a lot more sense. Not that you need a complex explanation to understand why this riff is fucking sick, or the follow-up more chug-heavy riff, which absolutely fits within David Herrera's definition of what death metal should be all about. At least in my ears, there's still a bit of black metal going on with how infernally melodic this riff is. And then this transition section right here starts out almost pure black metal, but then the drums kick in, and it's kind of a death grind thing. Whatever you want to call it, this is some of the best death metal, black metal, whatever the fuck type music out there. The follow-up release to the Sigil of Baphomet EP came out in 1994 with a promo tape that was later combined with Sigil of Baphomet and Ceremony of the Nine Angles as the Theia Gawisha Suma compilation, which is essentially Imprecation's debut full-length, which is is luckily now back in print thanks to the efforts of Yosuke from Nuclear War Now. Go out and get this if you don't already own it because it's amazing. And the 1994 promo tracks that the compilation starts off with are some of Imprecation's best ever. I mean, you got this song on here, Emperor of the Infernal Spirits, starts out with another sort of classic death metal, black metal, whatever kind of riff. And then this fucking beast hits you. The big groove intro riff to Emperor of the Infernal Spirits. One of the greatest death metal riffs of all time. Just as many chugs as Suffocation or Internal Bleeding, but done in this fucked up black metal, death metal style. And yeah, they still do go fast, but it's Imprecation fast, which means it's still going to be atmospheric and evil sounding, satanic in its very essence. Particularly during the tremolo pick sections like this, which still sounds like black metal to my ears, but also definitely fits David Herrera's definition of death metal. From there, they increased the complexity by layering in another harmonic guitar part and the return of those almighty Imprecation-style keyboards, the epitome of evil and death metal. Just as atmospheric as Burzmer Darkthrone, but done in a more death metal-y way. Speaking of which, we still got plenty of those death grind parts, real heavy snare hits on the blast beats, all kinds of weird rolling toms and shit, then back into some more atmospheric stuff. And we eventually get hit with possibly the best example of what I like to call the Imprecation ending, bringing back that groove from the beginning of the song, but leaning even harder into that jun 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 hammer blow chug type stuff. That whole Theurgia Gawisha Suma compilation is absolutely essential listening for any serious fan of death metal, but unfortunately Imprecation kind of dissolved after this, which is probably a big part of why they aren't name checked as often as they should be compared to other classic death metal bands.
Is that all you got, nigga?
Oh, no, nigga. That's just the tip of this iceberg.
In 2004, former Imprecation guitarist Wes Weaver came back with the very Imprecation sounding band Blaspherian, who I covered a couple years ago in episode 287 of this program. And I gotta wonder if that resurgence didn't light a fire under the ass of the other Imprecation guys, because in 2009, Ruben and Dave put together a new Imprecation lineup and started recording some new songs. And there's actually more post-Reformation Imprecation material than there is material from their classic era. Fortunately for us, the new Imprecation stuff is also fucking dank.
That's what's up.
It's almost like they never left. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more conventional old school death metal revival sounding than the gonzo shit they had going on back in the 90s, but a lot of that might just be because so many old school death metal revival bands are doing the Imprecation thing, many of them without even realizing it. Personally, I'm just glad there's another band out there that understands how to write some good fucking death metal. And of course, they're gonna bring back those kick-ass atmospheric sections that were such an important part of the 94 promo and the Sigil of Baphomet 7-inch. This song in particular, Angel of Salvation's Doom, absolute classic. And then this fucking chug part here, demonic, heavy, up there with other old guy death metal bands like Disma in terms of shit that actually understands how to make some good death metal. I mean, are you hearing that evil fucking guitar lead? That's fucking quality right there. And Imprecation would go from strength to strength in this new era of the band. Around 2014, they picked up Jeff Tandy, formerly of Averse Sephira, currently of Trenchant on bass. Very good choice for an addition to the Imprecation roster. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses, because not only did Wes Weaver, who wasn't involved in this new version of Imprecation, but was kind of doing a brother band thing with Blaspherian, die in 2021, we also lost Ruben on drums later that same year. And you'd think this would kill the band. I mean, how much of this episode has just been me fucking going every time Ruben does something cool on drums? But hey, wouldn't you know it, we're here in 2025 and we got a new Imprecation release coming out, Vomitum Tempestus, apparently consisting of material written when Ruben was still around. For the replacement on drums, we got Matt Hefner from Cruciamentum, another really good choice, doing a really good Ruben Elizondo impersonation, and it's probably the best new death metal I've heard this year so far. Like this riff right here, this could have come off a fucking Dark Reign demo. And Dave's vocals, great as always. Very much in the school of, hey, instead of death metal doing all that stupid shit, why don't we just take what worked in the 90s and develop that some more? Which results in you getting some great atmospheric, evil Imprecation riffs like this. Again, bringing in this sort of depraved, majestic, almost black metal feeling. And then it goes into chugs like this, which are vintage Imprecation goodness. But you know, since it's Imprecation, they're gonna have to get super atmospheric and dark on you. And don't worry, that shit's gonna happen. Like when they start moving around inside the chords like this, they start slowly bringing those keyboards in, then they hit you with this massive dose of evil, atmospheric death metal guitar, straight out of the 90s. Maybe even darker than people were used to back then. Post-apocalyptic, wrecked, demonic landscapes, full of torture and existential misery. But don't worry, these guys aren't slowing down in their old age. Hell, half the band ain't even really that old at this point. So you know they're gonna crawl out of the muck with some triumphant, fast, fucking evil death metal shit. Honestly, I'm pretty excited to hear where Imprecation's gonna go next. I mean, losing Ruben, that's big. But they seem to be maintaining course at the moment, which means that there's never been a better time to get into Imprecation than now. If you don't know them, well, hopefully now you do. I've been talking about it for 20 minutes. And if you don't like them, you're probably a fucking poser. But hey, thanks for listening or watching or whatever you did anyways, and I'll see you next time.
I have an air mattress and I'm sleeping on the floor. And I need to figure out what the heck I'm going to do with my life.